Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. This episode of VUX World is brought to you by BotMock. If you're still writing code to design and test your chatbot's conversational experience, then you should check out BotMock. It's the smartest way to design and prototype conversational apps. So if you're using things like, mind maps and process maps and whiteboards, or if you're getting straight into the code to try and build some stuff, or if you're using things like Sketch to try and build sort of prototypes in, then 100% check out BotMock. It's companies of all sizes using it, small companies, large companies. You can build Alexa skills in there and it'll save you hours because you can actually collaborate with your whole team while you're designing your thing. It's, even down to handing it over to developers. The whole thing is a huge collaboration tool. It's absolutely fantastic. Do check it out. You can try BotMock for free at botmock.com/VUX World. That's botmock.com/VUX World. Thank you, BotMock. This week, we're talking about voice-first social networking and voice-first messaging. You'll have noticed that things like LinkedIn, Instagram, WhatsApp, they've all released those little icons, a little microphone icon that lets you send audio messages to your network. And we've also seen a rise in specifically voice social channels, such as Hear Me Out, which has just announced a partnership with Ford. We all know that where the users end up is where brands end up as well. If all of these platforms are being used heavily by users, then it will present opportunities for brands. So to take us through the voice first social space, we're speaking to Daniel Gonzalez, who is the co-founder of voice first messaging platform Soundbite. Dan takes us through the social landscape in a voice first world and explains a little bit about some of these companies that are coming up and how they're kind of built potentially on an old social media model, and he'll tell us a little bit about how Soundbite is breaking that model to bring a true voice first messaging platform and a true voice first experience to the social space. Towards the back end of the episode, Dan starts getting into some of the complexities around building a voice assistant. So in terms of all the technology that sits behind things like Alexa and Google Assistant, and how that technology actually could be limited and could actually present a challenge for designing true conversational experiences. And he even draws on the practice of VUI design as being almost a compensation for the the lack of technology that sits behind some of these voice assistants. Really, really interesting, and also how then Soundbite is trying to get around that. And it's a really, really interesting episode. So it's one, if you want to keep an eye on the voice first social space and you want to find out a bit more about that, this episode will be interesting for you. But then also, if you're interested in some of the challenges around building a voice assistant and how those challenges can be overcome in the future, then the back half of the episode will be for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Daniel Gonzalez. Daniel Gonzalez, welcome to the podcast. Pleasure to have you on. And yeah, thank you for joining us. It's been we've been sort of wanting to do this for a little while now, and I'm glad to sort of finally meet up with you and to do this. So welcome.
Likewise, Ken. Yes, I'm very eager to finally be on this show of yours. Been looking forward to it, and it's really a pleasure to be on it. Thank you for having me. No problem. Thank you for setting aside the time. So, tell everybody out there a little bit about yourself, Dan, and tell people a little bit about Soundbite as well. So, like Kane mentioned, I am Daniel Gonzalez. I am the co-founder of Soundbite. We're actually based here in Miami, Florida, a bit unconventional, or at least a bit of an outsider. And Soundbite think of it as a touch-free voice messaging app, right? We have the beta on, and you can actually go on the App Store and test it out. So essentially, it is like you just open up Soundbite, you say your friend's name and start talking instantly. Rather than having to like tap your phone 1,000 times like you're used to, sending text messages and email. Imagine just having that frictionless experience that we're seeing now people like I used to more as I use voice, Alexa and so on. Imagine just have it for communication and direct communication. Imagine just talking directly to your friend, and even say rather than using Siri, send Kane a message, I say, Kane, hey, how are you doing? So we're creating a direct, frictionless, communication experience, focusing on the interaction and just taking it to the next level. The world is moving more towards voice and voice, interactive everything. And we see, why can't, we make communication today, just the same,
So sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say then, well, I'll talk more about the vision and so on towards the end or later.
Yeah.
But okay. That's the product of what we have right now. Yeah.
Okay, so would you describe it, and maybe it's not a thing that can be necessarily pigeonholed as such, but I'm just trying to think of whether or not we can frame it for the listeners. Would you describe it as a messaging platform, or would you describe it as a sort of social media site?
A touch-free voice messaging app or messaging platform, yeah.
Okay, fair enough then. And that is exclusively on iOS at the moment, is it?
Yes, it's exclusively on iOS. We do plan to release an Android version, but until we perfected the app on the iOS version, because right now it's in beta, then we'll switch it over to Android. I'm excited to go to Android, believe it or not, because the Android App Store just gives a lot more flexibility in terms of what we can do with voice. Just in terms of what we need access from the device, in terms of audio inputs and outputs. But right now it's just iOS. Yeah.
Okay. And let's kind of discuss a little bit about, because I think that the whole kind of audio messaging and kind of voice social things are really starting to kind of gain a bit of traction now. So I think it sounds as though a frictionless and totally hands-free sort of voice messaging platform sounds like it could be the right time to do that sort of stuff. And we've seen sort of, places like LinkedIn introducing little microphones so you can send audio messages, and Instagram, I think, have done the same. How would you sort of, for the listeners out there who are not necessarily exploring the space of either voice messaging or voice sort of social, how would you kind of describe the current state of play in terms of it as an industry or as a sort of use case for users? What's the current sort of situation with it?
So, well, what I can tell you in terms of use cases from the people we've spoken to in the surveys and research we've done, people use voice for basically, two things, right? Number one, accessibility. Voice makes everything more accessible because you don't have to deal with like the graphical user interface as much. You don't have to tap as many times. You don't have to, because, when you do UX research, every tap of like an icon, every step or screen is considered like an extra action or step that the user has to take. And the more you reduce it, the more pleasant the experience, obviously, is assuming that the user gets the outcome they want. And voice is a way for the user to get the outcome they want, because in messaging, it's to send a message, to communicate. Voice offers the ability to make that more frictionless, to reduce every action possible, reduce it significantly, because we're so used to having to tap our phone. We might think, to get into, iMessage, I have to tap, 1, 2, 3 times to start typing. But what we don't realize is that every letter we tap is another action. So it just compounds and compounds on each other, where the point is it's kind of annoying. I remember in a personal experience I had is I use one app, Calendly, and I love that app. When it comes to scheduling an appointment, I just it has an integration to your calendar, just one click and boom, it gets added. And I know, but when I came across another app where it asked me to type out my email, it was the most painful experience ever. I know it's a bit exaggerated, but having to tap out every letter of my email versus just a one tap, that was like, it was like the most painful experience, but I realized, wow, I never felt that pain before because I never knew of anything better. I never knew that one tap experience. And I believe the same is going to be true for, your voice. Yes, the problem with voice is that it may be socially constrained to like certain situations. Like you probably wouldn't want to do it, when you're in a crowded room or when it's really loud. But, more and more people are starting to use it. From our research, we found that around 67% of people like send voice messages, not voicemail, at least once a week, and around, 12, 13%, use it daily, That survey is based on a 1,000-person survey we used Mechanical Turk for about a year or two back. So that's where we kind of got our evidence or your basis for our beliefs there. So, I mean, people are using voice more and more, and it's evident because, like you mentioned, these other platforms are beginning to adopt it. Just adding it, but again, they're adding it as an extra feature. They're not making an entire offering around that, which is where I believe they're lacking. Voice can be so much greater than just a tap to hold microphone where you accidentally slip your finger off or, it still requires just too much touching. It's like, can't we take that further? Can't we take voice further,
And how would you sort of describe it in terms of some of its closest sort of competition? Maybe is the microphone on LinkedIn and the microphone on WhatsApp and whatnot might not necessarily be the same kind of use case because there is friction, I suppose, that's inherent in that. But I mean, we spoke very, very briefly beforehand about a startup that looks like it's pursuing something similar, TTYO. I know that there's one that's on Product Hunt called Dialogue, and Hear Me Out seems to be getting a bit of traction as well. I think they kind of struck a deal with Ford. How would you sort of describe what Soundbite does in relation to some of those other things that seem to be sprouting about?
So where Soundbite really differentiates itself and will continue to differentiate itself is focusing on the interaction in voice. The problem with all these other platforms is that they're basically using existing social media models and retrofitting voice into it, but they're not building a social media model or messaging model from voice out. They're just incorporating voice into it. For example, when Hear Me Out came out, and there was Hear Me Out, there was Clamor, there's Pundit 1.0, Anchor 1.0, Bubbly, so many people have tried the audio social media model. Now Dialogue is doing it too. And from what we saw, there's, Soundbite was originally the same thing, an audio social media, but we pivoted to becoming a messaging platform. And what we realized is that, number one, because social media requires the element of search to be able to find content, because the focus is not on communication, it's on sharing and content. So because, there aren't any super sophisticated algorithms out there yet that can automatically parse all voice and, create, structured data sets without any user input, you typically have to write a title or a hashtag following the voice thing. So I realized, isn't this kind of silly? I realized that when I use, Soundbite 1.0, it's like, I posted up a soundbite, but now I have to type a title. That defeats the whole purpose. It's like, this is like a Twitter for an audio overlay. I realized that when I was using, I think it was Clamor, where it's like, I read the title, I don't need to listen to it. It's like people talk not to create typically content unless that's the sole purpose, like, this amazing podcast. But in terms of, communicating, people use it to communicate to, to express easier, faster, frictionless, and then it's like, okay, great, I just talked, but now you're asking me to type and text. It's like, it defeats the whole purpose of the interaction, the experience, And that's my biggest, gripe with what all of them are still doing. It's like they haven't been able to see past the interaction element, the building from voice outward. It's like you can't have voice and touch. You can have touch as like a secondary thing where it's like just in case the voice fails because it's still, cutting edge technologies, which, we have that feature as well, but you have to build it from voice outward. My impression, to be successful or to be, to really change the game in this space. Many people are still stuck on the graphical user interface. They claim to be audio, but they're still looking with their eyes too much. They still rely too much on their eyes, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand what you're saying in terms of I've been having to play around with Hear Me Out over the last couple of weeks, just trying to dig around into other sort of voice social platforms to see what's what and stuff. And you're right in that it's essentially a feed, isn't it, full of hashtags, and you can get a feed from a hashtag, and then you've got to decide which one you want to listen to, and then it becomes really consuming because you need to kind of, your eyes and your hands are fixed on your phone as you search for content, and then as soon as you press play, there's nothing left for your hands and your eyes to do while you sit and listen. So it feels a little bit kind of like it's merging two different types of interaction, which doesn't seem to be quite as frictionless. So with Soundbite, I was saying I haven't had a chance to see Soundbite, by the way, because my phone number is a UK phone number, and it on the On the app, it would only let me register with an American one. But it is Soundbite. I'm assuming there's some sort of graphical interface, but is the intention that you can use the whole thing entirely without really touching it?
That is the entire intention of it. There is a graphical user interface, and it is important, especially now, more serving as a handicap, because we're still used to looking at our phone screen. Because our graphical user interface isn't the point of it isn't to interact with it. The point is to just convey information, to convey what's going on, to let you know whether the app's recording you, whether it picked up the right person, whether it's listening to you or not listening to you, to convey information. We actually have a unique design challenge, because there's less of a direct cognitive connection between the actions you take and the design of the app, because you're not touching it. When you touch things, you expect it to do certain things, but we have to, convey all this information to you, from just you talking, So it's like we have a more complex, UI UX decision, situation to solve, to really, convey this information. But it's an exciting challenge to tackle, and an important part of our app that's going to, not in the beta, but it will, take place soon, probably in the final version, is the ability to just completely look away from the phone screen, if you want to. Yes, we have the GUI is important right now as a handicap, because you can look at the screen to get that confirmation you need or want to know it's doing the right thing, but it's still a frictionless experience. But we will be adding a kind of like a sound UX, where by looking away from the screen, if I say Kane, right, a sound will pop up probably indicating Kane, but it won't be saying Kane, because, we don't want to create a machine that talks back to you, really. We're not trying to create an AI or anything like that, no. I think it's kind of eerie if I were to say Kane, it says Kane, so thank you. I wasn't hoping to speak to him. I was, so we're going to try to we're trying to build, a kind of sleek, audio or sound UX, to kind of indicate these, to give you the confidence you need that the app is communicating the way it should, without you even having to look at the screen, which would be great, for situations where you're out and about, or certain vehicles and stuff, you just can't look at the screen, things like that, could be great use cases, though,
It sounds as though you're working on some similar, or you're at least putting up and dealing with and tackling similar challenges to what I think people in the voice space more broadly will likely come across over the next probably year or so, because I put a video on LinkedIn today on IGTV and on LinkedIn around the whole multimodal thing, and in terms of Amazon's releasing the new Echo Show, and Google are announcing or suspected to be announcing the Home Hub this month, and then you got the Fire TV with Alexa built in. So the assistants that exist already are seeming to be now they're kind of introducing screens, and although they're voice first and screen secondary, as you mentioned, the screen is acting more as a supplement rather than the main kind of ingredient, so to speak. So it sounds as though in future there's going to be design challenges, design strategy challenges around how you convey visual information whilst being in a voice-first environment, so leading with voice and supplementing with the screen. It sounds as though you're kind of on the verge of trying to tackle that yourself already, and maybe is ahead of some of the other people. I'm interested in digging a little bit around how you kind of approach that. How do you approach and where do you start when it comes to trying to design purely for voice, but then knowing that you need some kind of visual cues, if you like?
So I think the challenge really is not so much a challenge in design, but a challenge in defining what is, voice. What is it? There is no dichotomy between, audio information and visual information. At least there doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be one or the other, because voice in its true self is nothing more than a means of interaction, a way to interact with something, not what is being interacted with. You do not interact with voice. You interact with voice. You get what I mean? You're not interacting with the voice. You're interacting with voice. So, given that, for example, people immediately, it's funny, they assume they hear voice and think, oh, Alexa and Siri, and that's the only really big examples out there that use voice interaction. But they're taking it a step farther by building, basically trying to build an AI or an intelligent agent. But the technologies underlying the intelligent agent are completely separate from the voice. It's the same as, if I'm talking to you, Kane, right? I'm talking to you with my voice, right? but and you're interacting and you're conveying the information back to me with your voice, but you're processing all this information, right, in your brain. You're coming up with unique responses in your brain, but that's not your voice, So they're trying to essentially build like, the mouth, and the ability to talk and the brain at the same time, you know?
Because you can still interact with your hands and it will use the same part of your brain that's translating the speech.
Exactly, exactly. When you can, when you touch an interface, right, there's still processes going on in the background to deliver that, unique response. Voice is just a different interaction to get that same response, but in a more frictionless and faster way. You don't need to talk to something and then have it talk back to you. You can talk to something and have it do something. You can talk to the screen and have it play, your favorite TV show. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean voice is irrelevant or, visual. They're not competing. They coexist. Voice is really, more than anything, the infrastructure, right, for all future technology, in my opinion. Voice is how we communicate with each other, today, but it can also be how we communicate with objects. We don't need objects. We don't need to have a conversation of everything. I can just talk to, as Amazon did with their, with the microwave and all the new products they did, talk to my microwave and say like, hey, set it to, 3 minutes, 30 seconds on high, boom, I don't need it to talk back to me. I just need it to do what I want it done, and so by reducing the scope of the brain that you're trying to build, right, instead of a full-on general intelligence, you can actually execute near perfectly on voice today and have it to do and interactive things that allow it to, do those functions very well. We don't need a general intelligence, to have voice work. That's a misconception. You don't need the general AI to make voice work. You just need it to work with very simple functions today, right? And make sure those functions are critical and have strong use cases. And then you can get voice to work very well as the means of interaction, which is what we need people to start doing, and they're doing more. They're trying to sell you the whole horse at once, but they're not, it doesn't come as one piece, it doesn't, things have to be built over time. That's why, I think voice can be a lot farther off today as a means of interacting than is what they're trying to sell it for, because they're trying to sell you the whole kit and caboodle, really. And so, if you look at voice as a means of interaction, it becomes so much easier to design because you can have of course, some things are just easier to have, again, a multimodal approach is going to be very important. You don't want to have to talk or say something to everything. Sometimes it might just be easier tapping. Even a soundbite, right? You don't talk to the app, at all. You're not saying, okay, change. You don't do any administrative functions with your voice. You don't type in your name with your voice. You don't add friends with your voice. You don't, go through the, onboarding process with your voice. You don't add your number with your voice, Mind you, we could add some of those things with voice, but, switching screens and stuff, you don't need to do that with your voice. It's a lot easier to swipe if you have the phone in your hand, But the main bread and butter of soundbite is using voice as a means to interact with your friends and family. Just talk to them. Soundbite's more like a portal, really, to just talk to everyone and on the same level. It's a real voice platform in the sense that everyone you can talk to everyone equally. There's no middleman. One thing that soundbite could really interplay with in the future is, because I'm not convinced that Alexa, Siri, are actual voice platforms. I'll be honest. They claim that they're voice platforms. I disagree. And my main argument for that is you cannot, because there's no platform right now where you can use your voice to interact equally with all the assistants or all the, sub apps that they offer. If you build an Alexa skill, I can't just talk to that skill directly, if I'm having to invoke Alexa. I can't just talk, to Uber through the Alexa hardware device. I have to say, Alexa, give me a ride. Alexa is more, the hardware of Alexa is more like the iPhone. Alexa is more like an app. And the skills are in-app purchases or in-app, it's like a mini app market, but there is no app store. There is no place where you can use your voice to equally talk to everything, right? Where you can equally talk to Google, to Siri, to Alexa, and those other, companies that are building voice apps, And we see soundbite, because we're not building an assistant, how we plan to monetize and so on later is by offering, by creating a true platform where you can interact with all of them, equally, where other companies or brands can build out their own voice app, and us, where our users can, buy their services and products, directly from them, speak directly to them, within our app, a true conversational experience. And one other thing I want to mention, when it comes to conversational experiences, I think is a bit when it comes to conversational experiences, people think that you have to have a full conversation, and I'm not convinced that consumers want to have full conversations with companies. From the behavior I see right now, sure, you can argue back then commerce was all conversation, right? But typically that was during the time where we didn't have any other choice, right? When I was in the store, I didn't have if I didn't have a phone, obviously, the only person I could talk to is the guy at the store. So most likely I'll talk to him because, we're social creatures. But now with the phone, we have the option at any given moment to either talk with our immediate environment or the people we've known and, are friends with, family with, at any given moment through our phone. Given that choice, who would you rather speak with? The store clerk or your best friend? Right? And because of that, people are not seeking these conversational elements of, people that just work at a company. The people buy stuff from companies and go to customer service to get what they want, and that's it. They say what you want, get what you want, that's it, to keep it simple. People, are not seeking, connection or communication from brands or the people behind the brands. They love brands and that's wonderful, but they don't need the conversation from them. I would hate to have to get an Uber, then have to have have Uber ask me how was my day and have a conversation like, hey, I talked to plenty of other people, thank you, but I don't care. We already, given the choice that we have at any given moment between people we know or don't know, we would choose the people we know. So when it comes to brand experiences, the voice is going to be more and more important, but we cannot confuse, people don't want to have to talk to a machine or an AI. You don't want to have full conversations. We just want to interact with our voice and keep it at a minimal so we get what we interacted for,
Okay, so I think we'll move on to the brand side of things in just a moment, because I think that you touched on something quite interesting there that would be decent to delve into in terms of being able to connect with brands without going through the similar process that you do on Alexa. I think that'll be interesting. But I just want to kind of back up a little bit and get into a little bit more on your kind of design sort of process for this in terms of the multimodalities and also in general just designing a voice first interface in general. You mentioned you've done a lot of research to kind of give you some ideas of where to go, and you kind of started out with one product and then you pivoted to messaging. So can you talk us through a little bit about maybe either some of the things you've learned through designing a voice only interface, and how did you sort of approach it in the beginning?
So when we were pivoting from the social media platform to the messaging platform, we weren't going into it solving a problem. We did the entire process wrong. We're going into it and creating an experience. We realized there's something in voice that's special that we can create something special for. So we were thinking, okay, what is it? What makes up voice, right? Number one, there's three components. Talking, when voices, you're not touching anything, you're not, there's no friction, there's no pretensions, it's just talk, it's frictionless. Second, it's, naturally ephemeral. When we talk to our friends and family, other than on this great podcast, we're not being recorded. The words disappear as they're said, Then lastly, it's live. As you're talking, the other person can listen to you as you're talking. But again, that doesn't mean it has to go into a full duplex, phone call. So, when I hear people talk about VUI design and they're trying to they kind of make it come across as this cryptic, arcane, this new design that's coming out that it's no, it's actually pretty simple. The difficult part is the technology. The easy part is the design of it, because all you have to do is observe how people interact and just copy that. Literally copy how people interact with each other, emulate that on the device. The hard part is that the technology right now cannot emulate or cannot, properly communicate the same way as a person, And that's where I think...
Sorry, go on.
And that's where I think most of the designers are trying to have the challenge of. It's how can we, with limited technology, right, how can we still do our best to make it sound like another person, interact like another person back, you know? And it's like, well, great, you're solving like more of a symptom, but not the actual underlying issue. It's just, it's just not going to work doing it that way. It's an all or none type of, it's an almost all or none type of thing, in my opinion, at least to get mass consumer adoption. If people talk to something and they expect it to talk back to them, they want to be natural and fluid. They don't want it to even think it shouldn't even come across as being a machine, although oftentimes it's obvious, and the soundbite, well, before I go into soundbite, how people can do it today to kind of nearly perfect a VUI for whatever they're doing is, limiting the scope of what they're trying to offer to the point where the technology meets the UX expectations perfectly. I always like to work backwards, right? So I see this is the goal, right, of the VUI experience, being able to talk to it and be interactive with just like it would another person, right? Now, technological reality is not there yet, right? So let's work backwards, to see from where can to what extent can this technology fit, that experience, or what part of that experience can the technology right now capture it perfectly? How can we limit the technology stack? It's more like constraint optimization. How can we, given the constraints of technology, how can we so optimize it to nearly perfect the VUI experience? You have to have very concise offerings, very limited interactions, but deliver on them perfectly. People rather have something that does one thing perfectly than many things that does it okay. And that's the problem with voice assistants right now is they're promising the world, but they can't deliver the world yet. The technology is not there, and so adoption and so on is depends on what it is. Of course, is it's not as great as it could be. So if you're sorry, go on.
No, go on. You're right.
So if you're going to create like an Alexa scale, for something simple, the simpler you can make the tech requirements for it. It could be just tell them and say, hey, just say this one simple phrase, and then just get the thing done. It's just keep it simple so that you don't have to rely more and more or unnecessarily more on the technology, because the technology is not fully there yet. You can't talk to it, and you can't interact with it like another person yet. But there are ways to go around with the technology to get to that if you limit the scope of your offering.
We'll be back with more from Dan Gonzalez in just one moment, but first, did you know that 1 in 6 Americans already owns a voice-activated smart speaker? That's 16%. I've actually seen stats that go as high as 20%, and in the UK I'm pretty sure it's around about 1 in 10. So now is really the time to start thinking about designing conversational experiences for your customers. And if you are thinking about designing conversational experiences for your customers, then you should check out BotMock. BotMock is the best way to design, prototype and test your conversational apps. So if you're still using like mind maps and whiteboards, and if you're still hard coding scenarios directly into your code base, or using tools like Sketch to build your conversational prototypes, then you should check out BotMock. Companies of all sizes are using BotMock to design their Amazon Alexa skills, and are saving people hours by collaborating with your entire team. So from the design to the content to the developer handover, it's all in one application, and it is absolutely fantastic. You can try BotMock for free at botmock.com/VUXworld. That's BOTMOCK.com/VUXworld. That's interesting what you were saying. I can get that in terms of limiting the scope, and I think that seems to be something that we hear quite often is try and do one thing well, try and perfect one single use case, and kind of expand it out from there. I can completely get your angle there. I'm interested in what you said before that though, which it seems to be counterintuitive or counter to what most people who've been on the podcast at least have been talking about, which is that you said that the hard part is the tech, but the easy part is the design. I'm interested in digging a little bit deeper into that, because the common sort of train of thought is that actually the hard part is the design, in terms of mapping out, finding a use case, figuring out all of the different intents, and mapping all that to kind of responses, and testing it and iterating it and making sure it's natural, and persona design and all of these kind of things that go in to try and fabricate that conversational experience. The general consensus is that the hard part is the design, but the tech infrastructure is kind of there, and it's almost like the easy bit. So I'm interested in just delving a little bit deeper into why you think the design is the easy part, but the tech is the hard part.
So, I look in terms of like, what is the ultimate goal of these conversational experiences, of these conversational agents? Again, to talk like you would another person, to be able to interact with it like a person, and for it to like, be as intelligent to interact back with you like a person. Doesn't mean it has to sound like a person, but as intelligent. The reason why I emphasize more the text with VUI design, because right now the tech is just not there. I've spoken to plenty of senior researchers in AI. One of our advisors for Soundbite is a Dr. Roberto Ciccone. He's a former research director at IBM, and he's I've gotten to speak to many of the people that are inside the hard tech space in speech, and people from MIT, Beijing, Johns Hopkins, and a lot of ex-IBMers. And I'm just telling you, the technology is not there yet. No matter how you try to, tweak the VUI right now and such, you will not get it. The design won't make the intelligent agent. It won't. The design allows you to work backwards from the technology to deliver, to kind of fake it in a way, to make it so that you're using voice to interact with it, but that one specific use case is done perfectly. But the design itself is not going to make the intelligent agent. Think about it. If we had the technology to make it already talk back to like a person and everything, the VUI is pretty much there. It wouldn't be that difficult. VUI is a way to compensate. VUI design is a way to compensate for the lack of technology. It's a way, and not to discredit, I think it's a really important field. VUI right now is an important way to, how do we deliver a superior experience with limited technology, So if you're looking in terms of, how can we optimize for it, then yes, you can argue that VUI design is the challenge. But if you're looking at how can we create a true conversational agent, the technology is a challenge, If you want to work with what you have, you're right, VUI is a challenge. If you want to make it to what it should be, the technology is a challenge. So I'm telling you, the technology right now, we will not get anywhere near the promise of what voice has yet. We will not be able to talk to a machine completely naturally, and not just naturally, and I mean like just not like right now. It's pretty much constrained to like English, or at least very well. I mean, many other languages with their various accents and dialects, they kind of get left in the bucket really, in terms of those interactions. It's a technology that still has a long way to go. And the VUI design is more of a way to optimize what we currently have to make it useful and fit certain use cases. I'm not knocking VUI design. It's really important. I mean, we have to use it too. But it's not what's going to make, the intelligent agent. But it's a way to, get what we have right now, to make it useful. Yeah.
That's interesting.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm interested in getting into some of the technical stuff in terms of how you've overcome some of the technology challenges with Soundbite. But first, I'm wondering whether you can maybe expand on what some of those challenges are. You've obviously spoke to quite a few knowledgeable people in this space, and I'm assuming that you've come up against the challenges yourself as you've been building out Soundbite. So, in terms of what's preventing these intelligent agents from becoming as intelligent as they can be, what are some of those technology challenges?
Well, I mean, what I can tell you from the typical tech stack that's involved, at least for like Alexa, in a broad scope, from ASR, NLP, ASR, automatic speech recognition, NLP, natural language processing, NLU, natural language understanding, which I'll get to in a moment. It's the most important thing, and then NLG, which is natural language generation. When you speak to an Alexa, the biggest challenge, right, for many of these devices is typically the ASR part, right? At least depending on the scope of what the functions is, because ASR part is converting the speech to text. And although that has a pretty good accuracy, some words are still mistranslated. Oftentimes, there's a lot more variance because of the environment. Mind you, Alexa's at home, so typically has higher accuracy. But again, with households of multiple languages or different languages or accents, if you were outside or in different environments, there's a lot more variance that may challenge, the success of the audio to text transcription, which ultimately being at the beginning of the funnel, that can ruin almost the entire experience, This is why, texting, a bot tends to be a lot more accurate than, talking to it, because it doesn't have the error. It doesn't have the extra layer of voice. Mind you, I think the voice is still an important layer to add just because it makes the experience better. But, the point there is that the more text stacks you have, the more possibility of errors you have, So the next part being NLP, being able to process that information to deliver, that unique response, right? Now, the challenges of NLP, from my understanding, is typically what's solved with NLU, natural language understanding, which is the ability to have the machine understand you when you talk naturally, to understand context, understand meaning, And there are a few interesting startups that have some interesting technology behind that I'm kind of even eager to explore myself. And it's that part is probably going to solve the problems of NLP, but again, it's not, perfect yet. So when you talk to Alexa, there are so many different ways you can say the same thing, and when people are left with the expectation, you can say it any which way, right? And then they say it certain ways and it doesn't work. It kind of is frustrating. You have to set user expectations if the technology cannot meet those expectations yet, The worst thing is to have expectations that are not met. Whereas rather than saying, hey, this is what we can and cannot do, you won't be disappointed, because it's a reality that you're promising today. And if you don't deliver it, it's not going to come out good, People be more disappointed, and that's ultimately, worse. Because with voice, the challenge is that you have less opportunities to get it right. And that's a big challenge we're having with Soundbite, which is why we're moving on. Right now we've been using third-party technologies to make the experience, but we're going to move on to, developing our own IP, which I can share a little bit about later, of how to get it done. Because the graphical user interface is highly reliable, right? You tap on it, it's pretty much going to work, like 99.9% of the time. But the voice user interface, that's not always the case. Now, because there's a lot more tech stack behind it. Because not only the machine on your phone only needs to understand it touched here, right? Whereas the voice, it needs to understand what was said. There's a lot more needed to understand to get that to work, especially, all the different ways things can be said. And then lastly, with NOG, Alexa has to talk back to you. So it needs to actually, come up with a response back, which it's not, for example, for many times, rather than having Alexa talk back, and there are certain situations where you can say, like, turn off the lights and the lights are turned off. Wonderful. It doesn't need to talk back, right? Because it doesn't need to talk back, it actually, that's one part of the tech stack you can cut off, and it makes the experience so much better. Rather than having like a very awkward, conversation back, or having, not being as natural, many apps and so on can take off the NOG part, because it just, it limits all the parts of the tech experience that could go wrong, or could make the experience negative or bad, because the technology is not there yet. We cannot make a machine talk back to you perfectly like a human. It's not conversational. Yeah. Sure, there are things out there that can mimic. We can make a machine sound like a person, but doesn't mean they talk like a person. Like they wouldn't be able to do the same phrase and idioms and expressions, the same way your best friend probably would. It's not like your old chum, where you're having like the best conversation with. You would realize, oh wow, this is not my old chum.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So
go on. So yeah, I was just gonna close off with those are really just the challenges on the tech side. It's a really big stack. All those technologies have active research, and then the worst part is even within like academic research and like machine learning and AI technologies, it's something that does fall into the whole mainstream and popularity issue. Because think about it, when you look at machine learning, a lot of the same ideas and methods that they're being applied today with, better hardware and processors and technology, but they're still the same methods that have been applied for the past 50 years, and for example, deep learning is like a huge thing right now. And it's just, but there are other, machine learning has many subdisciplines, many areas. But, even in academia, some people popularize their method more than others, not because it's necessarily better. There could be other methods that people can explore that can better serve their specific use case or application or product, But, it's just been popularized because there's just been more papers, more peer support. And, just because popular hasn't made it better, So I still think there's even have to be a fundamental shift in the AI community to really start creating even newer methods or technologies that are away from the old to really, if what we've been using for the past 50 years hasn't solved the problem, maybe we should try something new. My personal mantra is, if you do what other people have already done, you'll never go farther than they already have. For example, you might look at Amazon or Google or, the other big company or Apple, like, oh man, they have all the money in the world, we can never, beat them on technology or AI or whatever. I'm like, no, that's not true. Because if money was the reason why AI has not been solved yet, it would have been solved because they have all the money in the world,
Yeah.
Money is not the concern. Money is not the issue to solving these hard tech problems. The problem is, novel and new approaches and ideas to solve these problems in ways that have not been thought of before, Someone will come up with it. Some other startup or someone will come up with it, and actually, it could be a challenge. Money is not the issue of solving these problems. And these are important problems to solve to really deliver, on all these promises.
So, I'm assuming that the ASR and the NLP and NLU and NLG and all of those other acronyms that kind of represent all of these hugely sophisticated pieces of technology, I'm assuming that those are almost like the things that make up the brain that you were describing earlier on. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you mentioned that you're not. Soundbite isn't trying to build necessarily the brain of the assistant. You're essentially trying to just nail one use case. So are you using all of that technology that we've just mentioned? And because you mentioned that those, that is inherently the challenges that exist in the technology is a big tech stack and none of it's necessarily perfect. So are you using any of that, or have you kind of avoided that entirely and you're looking at something different? How have you got around those problems and those challenges with Soundbite?
So, fortunately, I can say we have ignored a lot of them because we're not fulfilling a specific function or, creating a general intelligence. Soundbite is still able to create something I would say near a perfect VUI because you're just talking to another person through the app. I'm simply saying, Kane, hey, how are you doing? Boom. And then I hear back from you and then I have a conversation, and it's asynchronous, by the way. So it's not like I'm not opening up a phone call with you. So because the only thing that Soundbite needs to nail is the name. It only needs to recognize that a name was said, nothing else. Everything I say to you, Kane, will be always sent perfectly because, it's just a voice recording. It's just being sent to you. Boom, that technology is perfected. You're going to get 100% of the time and listen to it perfectly. There's never going to be errors in the audio recording. It's not converting into text where there's errors. No, it's always going to be perfect. And then I'm always going to get a perfect response because I'm getting a response from another human. It's not like I'm talking to a machine I'm expecting a response from. I'm talking to another human to get a response from. So it's always going to be a near perfect interaction. And because so we don't have to use NOP, NOU, NOG, none of that stuff right now. Yes, we're for the current third-party technologies, underlying third-party technologies we're using, it does use ASR. We're actually even shifting away from that, using them. I won't really want to disclose all of it, but we're shifting more from ASR to create rather using more DSP, digital signal processing, and more focus on acoustic models rather than even a text-dependent approach. So we're actually we figured out a way to how can we make this app work completely independent of text to get the name right. which actually make it at higher accuracy and independent of any language or accent out there. The fact that you can be, I'm Cuban, I was born here in America by background. My family's Cuban. I can tell you, the Spanish language has a broad, especially here in Miami, a broad array of accents. It's not a monolith of a language. And soundbite, for what we're developing, will essentially be able to work for all of South America, the world, and have a consistent user experience, because being not dependent on the text would make it enable it to work, for anyone, and I'm a really big guy when it comes to ubiquity and, a consistent experience throughout. Getting rid of the whole text there can largely eliminate the language barrier or the language issue when it comes to these technologies. You want to make it so that it doesn't have to be limited by that, So we are getting rid of, ASR, or not a text dependent approach. We're not using NLP because we don't need to understand what you're talking to the other person about. It's private, It's always going to be sent perfectly. We don't need natural language understanding because, well, the other person can understand you pretty well. It's your old chum, and then the NOG is what the other person already creates, So we're solving we're going after the use case of communication, keeping the tech stack very focused to just the name right, And so we're convinced that we have the best chances of delivering a superior voice-first experience, even though, we don't have all this technology, because we're being very focused. We're focused on the use case and we're focused on the technology to deliver a superior experience. It's still under development. Right now it's still in its beta and it's still kind of funky, just some bugs and stuff. And then the UI UX design, we got to flesh out the onboarding process more and stuff. But, the overall concept design is there, and the IP we're currently developing, will be a big game changer in the app experience. Because the less constraints you can use in the technology, which often comes in having a bigger tech stack, the bigger problems you have. The less you can use or figure out how to use, the better, in my opinion. So I think one part of VUI that should include is how can we use less technology? How can we make this experience rely on less technology? What's the minimum we can use to deliver a superior experience? Because every less technology you use in these, active research areas, the less chance there will be for an error. I see it as every one you add adds also a potential error layer in the entire process, from interaction to output. It's an extra layer where errors can happen. So far at least.
Yeah, and this DSP, the digital signal processing and acoustic modeling you were talking about, is the aim of that then essentially it would just analyze the sound of the sound and try and match that to a name that it knows?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, when people use the app, we do want to build an acoustic model of how people sound like to ultimately improve, the name recognition and the hardware detection. So you're absolutely right on that there. One thing that many other voice apps we see right now lack is, a self-improving model. The more you interact with some of these devices, it doesn't necessarily get better. But we want to make it so every time you interact with your friend, mind you, user consenting. I'm a big advocate for user privacy, opt-out ability, etc. Right now our app is in building those models. But obviously when we incorporate them into the app, we'll ask for user permission, and if they don't get it, well, they can still use the app without it, just be not as great of an experience. Unlike, say Facebook or these other companies, we're not using your data to deliver you ads. Our business model is not ads. We're using data to deliver you a better experience, and of course, big advocate on user privacy, opt-out, and so on. But yeah, using an acoustic model, using just more on voice, because I mean, this is going more into the research area. I think there's a way to get rid of ASR completely. Because think about it, our brains, because I'm a big advocate of, I think it's difficult to create something new. I think what we simply do is recreate what already exists in different ways. I hate it when people in AI, they say the brain is like a computer, and I say no, or nay. The computer is a really, really, really stupid brain. It's like you're putting, it's like comparing, could you imagine comparing something that's imperfect saying, oh, this imperfect thing is like what's perfect. No, it doesn't make sense. The brain is an immensely more powerful, more competent computer.
It's been getting built for a long time.
Exactly. And one thing we take for granted, and I think this is the reason why we have this misconception sometimes, is because our brain is the greatest user interface on this in existence. We don't have to think about having to move our arms. We don't have to even think about how to think. We just do it. It is the best user interface in existence. And sometimes we think that and think we're stupid, that we think, oh, the brain is stupid, but we don't realize how much processing from all five senses, across time, it's doing. My dog is more intelligent than any, AI currently built out there right now. The amount of information it processes to deliver, its unique output and responses, although we might think it's mundane, it's actually tons more intelligent, just from a survival standpoint, from a processing standpoint, and just from like a will standpoint, the ability, the biggest challenge of AI or creating AI is, I believe it's a determinate, it's like, we are indeterminate beings in the sense that, it's never just yes or no, we don't need to have a goal set prior to us or prerogative, or not a prerogative, that's the wrong word. We can deal with unknown. We can deal with things that, that are not binary in that sense. I might have used the complete wrong words, and I apologize for that and for everyone who's listening. But I hope my idea kind of gets across there. So when it comes to, AI, to build it, we have to replicate the brain. We have to look at the brain, understand how that works, and build it backwards. If we put the computer above the brain, how will we ever rebuild a brain? If we're already saying that the computer's above the brain, what direction are you going in? You're not going in the right direction. You have to know where you're going towards, what you're trying to build, and replicating the brain, through technology is the direction. You're not the other way around, as many people see. You're never going to get there otherwise. And think about it. I was going to go to my point earlier, with getting rid of ASR. Think about it, and this is something we're not going to put any research into this just yet, but I really, really want to explore this area. Think about it. Our brain, I'm assuming, does not process. We don't store audio that we hear, like in this conversation. We don't convert it to text, and then store it that way, and then we don't convert the audio to anything to then process it. We're processing it purely as audio, right? Think about it. People. Some people, unfortunately, are born blind and probably deaf as well. I mean, they're still, let's assume they're just born blind. They're still able to understand you and speak without that secondary, visual input or the secondary sensory, that cross-sensory experience to understand information, So, I'm assuming from my observation that the brain does not add an extra layer to processing, audio communication. So why do we? Right now, all the voice technology has been built on, a computer, a mainframe, hardware, GUI, and that's kind of denominated how we think of researching voice. Why do we ever think that we have to convert speech to text, right? Why do we think that? Well, because we're used to coding on computers, and coding is always code. That's the language of computers, so we have to convert ourselves to computer language. No. There is a way, I'm sure there's a way, because our brain, I'm surely does it, to skip all that, to skip having to even convert it to text. It's not natural. That adds an extra layer of unnecessary computation. There is a way to skip it, and that will just improve processing, to, tremendous heights, I believe. Imagine we do it, so it can be done. And sure, you can argue that, well, in our brain, it's stored as something. Well, yeah, the text is not stored as text, and the computers either. It's stored as, signals, or whatever. So, but the point is that they're not, you can argue that in our brain, it's converted the audio to the signal, but in computers, it's converted from speech to the text and then the signal, and it's just, maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think, how it's stored in the computer, how the computer processes it is completely unnecessary. It can skip having to understand the text, and it can go straight to the signal part. You know, it can just be purely audio. You know, and again, if we can get rid of that layer entirely, you know, all of voice technology would just be, you know, that would just be huge. You know, again, I don't have the magic answer to that just yet, but that's an area I definitely want to explore. You know, soundbite and more. Being we're going to be big in research. You know, deliver on, you know, voice first, and you know, we do want to be the leaders in you know, that area of research and so on. I mean, I love these other technology companies, but you know, there's a difference between technology companies that are incorporating voice first into what they already do to improve their existing product offering or service line, and there are companies that are building themselves out and first from voice first, you know, that their offering is the voice experience. That is what they're building themselves out on, you know? And we see ourselves being the latter. And there are a few other ones, the great other companies building the latter. But, you know, the former is very common. The latter is very rare. I'm very bullish on voice, as you could probably tell.
Absolutely, that's a good train of thought, that, and I think that's a really interesting thing to explore as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing how you get on with that, because it does sound as though there's a whole load of clunkiness, I suppose, and a whole, as you mentioned, you know, layer upon layer of added risk in terms of you know, processing these signals and turning them into text, and then not trying to understand what it is and all that. I do really, I can totally understand your kind of train of thought there, and that kind of vision.
It's all about sorry to interrupt you there. It's really just all about, you know, perspective. You know, it's about looking at this problem in a different way, or a better way. You know, we've been tackling these issues using technologies that were originally tackling other issues, you know, but because we didn't know how to do it any other way, we've retrofitted trying to solve voice in a graphical user interface using these other technologies, rather than trying to replicate from the source, like, how does the brain solve it? You know, how can we do that? How can we emulate and capture that or copy that as closely as possible? I might be wrong, but I'm just not convinced from what I've seen that the brain processes speech and audio the same way we're so used to these technologies. You know, these technologies are built from, or don't have the solid roots, or the same roots as how it should. And that is what's going to limit, you know, in my opinion, the potential, takeover of it. You know, same way how these same machine learning ideologies are still being used. Sure, we're having marginal improvements through, you know, computing power and so on, but, you know, the issue is, you know, not the computing power, but rather, I believe, the underlying method being used, or at least if we change the method to be significantly better. You know, it's like, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. But anyway, I think my point went across there. It's an exciting area. You know, we just have to look at things of how they are already done, and not, you know, we have to look at things how they're done, how they are, not change that. You know, then we'll go a lot farther. You know, the direction for technology should be the brain. And, you know, when I see people, again, put the brain above the computer, I say, hey, you lost direction. You're just trying to make the computer better, but to what?
Yeah, 100%. Dan, this has been absolutely immense. It's been such an interesting conversation. Tell the listeners where they can check out Soundbite. Presumably it's in the US at the moment.
I mean, it's on the App Store, but yeah, right now you do need a US number. You know, we're still trying to figure out the whole GDPR thing in Europe. We just haven't, you know, put any. We've just been focusing on building the beta, so we just haven't put in that yet, unfortunately.
So where can people find the app, and where can people kind of check you out online and stuff like that?
Yeah, so our website is sndbite.com, www.sndbite.com. We do have another domain that we own called soundbite.app, but we haven't routed it yet to the current domain. Then on the App Store, it's Soundbite, Soundbite, not BY, BITE, and we have a little green alligator. We're like the third one down. So just look for the green alligator. I apologize if the onboarding experience is not obvious. We're still fixing a lot of those things, and, you know, just going through internal, you know, changes and, you know, fixes, to solve these issues. But it's there. The core concept of the experience is there. You can use it. You know, it's best in a quiet environment. we do have a secondary tactile approach in case the voice doesn't work yet. Obviously, it's only there as a supplementary thing for now. For example, if it's too loud, you can press and hold the icon, the picture in the middle to end the bite. We don't call them sound bites, and this version of sound we call it bites. So bite your friends, send a bite to your friends. It's a fun play on words there because we believe we want to differentiate the audio experience. And when it comes to communication, people don't think of microphones. People don't think of stereo and headphones. When people think of communication, they just think of talking. And so when we think of audio, why do we have to make it sound so pretentious, so technical, so machine heavy? It's like, no, just talk. Soundbite, we're trying to stick away from all that iconography as much as possible, which is a design challenge, because that's what people are used to seeing. But I'm really keen on, the brand and the perception of it, what we're trying to build there. But yeah, you can check out the app that way. You can follow me on Twitter, where I normally tweet about such things. I am Daniel G, I believe.
We'll put the link. We'll put the link in the show notes anyway, so people can hop to the show notes and find a link to the website. We can link to the app in the App Store. We can link to yourself on Twitter and things like that. So do check it out. It's it sounds really, really interesting. Certainly the stuff you were talking about in terms of the future thinking as well around trying to move away from ASR stuff. It's fantastic. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
No, it was my pleasure, Ken. Thank you very much for having me on the show, and I hope your listeners enjoy this episode.
That was Daniel Gonzalez of Soundbite. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. That was such an interesting podcast. There's been plenty of podcast episodes that we've done where we delve into so much detail and we have such kind of juicy conversations, but that one is definitely up there with one of the best. I think that Dan's analysis of where the current state of play is with voice social is interesting in terms of companies applying the same social rules, if you like, that we've had in the graphical user interface space, and just essentially layering voice on top of it. Some of the complexities and challenges that come with that in terms of having to find things with hashtags and things like that. So whether the days of voice social are numbered already before it even starts, who knows? It's interesting to think about that. And I think that the thing that they're doing with Soundbite and just focusing purely on one use case, and Dan, that was kind of the design tip from Dan, really, is that focus on one use case. The technology, as he was saying, seemingly isn't quite there, and we know that because we know that we need to put a load of effort up front into the VUI design stage and in the design strategy stage. So I think it's interesting how he was saying that VUI design is essentially compensating for the technology not being as sophisticated as it needs to be able to handle human conversation. Such an interesting take on things, and then right the way down through the design bits and through to the technology as well, in terms of what the real challenges are and how layering things like ASR, NLU, NLP and all of those other NL things together on top of each other introduces more risk, and how they've kind of overcome that with Soundbite. And then looking into the future in terms of trying to move away from automatic speech recognition and just trying to analyze the audio itself to recognize when someone's asking it to do something. Really, really interesting conversation. There is bags and bags of insights and interesting tidbits in there. So thank you, Dan, so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Botmock for sponsoring this episode. And as always, we'll see you next week.